This really ought to be reported as a news flash. This is the third time in a month that Andrew has given a lecture indicating the dilemma that Paul was faced with as he was presenting the freedom of the gospel of Christ, which leads to freedom and life in comparison to the gospel that was being preached in the traditional performance-based Jewish church at the time, based on rules, regulation, and our levels of performance, which was ultimately leading to death. It was not leading to life at all. It was leading to death and leading to more sin rather than less sin. And of course, Paul was being convicted by the public and by the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the time of preaching such a free gospel that it would lead to rampant sin. Well, that life's illustration happened in my own life. I went into medical practice in a town in Texas where there was a high concentration of rattlesnakes in the geographic area. So when I got down there from the Midwest, I began to prepare myself for treating rattlesnake bites. And little did I realize that our hospital did not carry the cure for rattlesnake bites. They did not carry the antivenom that's used for treating rattlesnake bites. And I couldn't hardly believe this, but apparently the physicians on the medical staff had decided they didn't want to treat rattlesnake bites and thought it was too litigious and not a endeavor they wanted to get into or serve the public with. So they thought if they didn't carry the rattlesnake venom in the emergency room, then they'd have to refer all the rattlesnake bites out, and they wouldn't be caught up in the treatment of treating rattlesnake bites. Well, this went against every fiber in my body in terms of delivering health care to a population of people. So I lobbied the hospital to immediately obtain the antivenom, which was extremely expensive. That was the other factor against it. But the expense should be no factor when you're talking about life and death and loss of limb. So anyway, they certainly listened to my pleas and very quickly obtained the antivenom for rattlesnake bites. So in short order, I realized also that the community had not been educated in the fact that we had the antivenom. So they were bypassing our community, going to other communities, consuming more time and effort and expending energy to get there. In the meanwhile, they were exacerbating and making their bites worse and making the potential for death and disability worse. So I went out into the public and began to lecture them and teach them on the phenomenal capacity that we now have in the new biologically active antivenom, and spent all my time talking and focusing on the attributes and the positive effects of early administration of antivenom in the prevention of any long-term medical complications from rattlesnake bites. Well, this didn't go over very well because the method of communication prior to this was that the staff at the hospital and EMTs were schooled and taught in the fact of a scare tactic. The public was shown slides and pictures of loss of limb and loss of life as a result of bite injuries from rattlesnake injuries, and the entire focus of the educational program was based on fear. Well, of course, when I took this freeing message of mine to the public that we had the cure for rattlesnake bites and there was no need for fear, I never showed a significant gruesome photograph, a slide, or even a testimonial of a gruesome outcome of snake bites, but focused entirely on the positive effects of the administration and early treatment with the intravenous antivenom. Well, this didn't go over very well amongst my colleagues and cohorts, but they began to criticize me for preaching this freedom of treating rattlesnake bites, as Paul was also criticized for the freedom of his gospel. So I began to monitor this, and I found out that the scare tactics had not worked. The incidence of rattlesnake bites in our ER had been steady for the number of years that I tracked it. And then after the fact that we stocked the rattlesnake antivenom in the ER and had early administration of treatment and educated the public in the fact that we had the venom, antivenom, and could adequately treat bite injuries. The actual incidence of snake bite injuries coming into our ER, rather than escalating, which it was proposed by my adversaries it would do, actually went down. Not only did the incidence of bite wounds go down that we treated, but also the incidence of significant complications from the bites that people sustained in our locality and region. So the administration of the cure as quickly as possible and from a preventive standpoint worked much better and did not lead to the rampant escalation in bites that I had been accused of. And as I began to study this more, I actually began to study more about the organism of the rattlesnake himself. And it's very obvious that when people are out around rattlesnakes, if they're in a state of fear, they have an increase in their heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased body temperature, all the hormones and stress chemicals circulating in the body. The snake can sense this, and they're more likely to get bit. So when people are out of fear, there's less incidence of the bite even occurring, just based on their own physiology of fear. If you're in a physiologic state of ease, rather than a state of fear, you're in a state of freedom because you're not concerned and worried about the bite, because you know if you do get bit, there's a cure readily available. Then your heart rate is down, your blood pressure is down, your stress hormones are down, and the snake is much less likely to bite. So it's a perfect life's illustration of the same dilemma Paul was faced with. I only hope that you can use this in your own life. And my hope, of course, and prayer for you is that if you get bit by a rattlesnake, you have early administration of the antivenom. And for your life's dealing with your own situation with God and relationship with God, I hope you choose the gospel of Christ, which is easily available. It's offered by grace only, by faith only, and by Christ only. It's free, and it leads to life rather than death. Thank you very much. Appreciate your blessings.